Members are content that we start the meeting in open session.
Yep.
Just what day everybody's I'd like to welcome everybody to today's Public Accounts Committee meeting and this session. And just some housekeeping rules. I would ask that everybody turn off mobile phones and electronic devices, with the exception of your tablets, which contain obviously your committee meeting pack. It's not sufficient to have your mobile phones on silent, as they continue to disrupt or interfere with the Assembly recording. Members, I would like to take a moment to welcome Jack Peel to the committee. Over here to my left. Jack will be replacing Trevor as Assistant Clerk, who will be moving on to the Clerk's Assistant's Office in the coming days. So I think next week maybe will be his last. So he's seeing September out with us. So you're very welcome, Jack, on behalf of the committee. Okay, members, I've received no apologies. Is member aware of any apologies? Mr. Girvan will join us later in the meeting. Okay, members, minutes of the last meeting of the 10th of September. They're at page 6 of your electronic packs. If members are content for the minutes to be agreed, I'll sign them into the record. Agreed?
Yeah, agreed, yeah.
Agreed, okay. Members, we have no items of correspondence or matters advising to consider, so we will proceed into the next item on the agenda, which is agenda item 5, the ministerial direction from the Agriculture Minister. And it's agenda item 5, which is at page 14 of your electronic packs. This is a ministerial direction on the Dard headquarters moving to Ballykelly. An outline business case for the move has now been completed, and the preferred option is to relocate to Ballykelly in 2 stages by the end of 2020. The funding required will be 29.7 million capital and 11.3 million resource. The Minister's proposal for relocation was agreed by this Executive on the 26th of June 2014. The Minister has agreed that as the business case was considered only the option to relocate, it was difficult to access the value for money of the relocation, and the Minister considers that the decision to relocate is consistent with the Programme for Government commitment to relocate to a rural location, and that the wider benefits outweigh the value for money concerns. Just to let members know that the Audit Office staff will continue to monitor the progress of this project. Trevor, you wanted to come in?
Yes, Chairperson. I mean, obviously, I would do welcome, in terms of Programme for Government, I welcome the fact that we're decentralising the jobs from Belfast. And I have nothing in terms of Ballykelly. I think it's the process that concerns me more. That so Ballykelly, quite rightly, would be a good location in terms of deprivation and job losses that's been announced. The bit that concerns me is, and I mean, I think it's highlighted here in terms of we actually can't do a proper value for money analysis with actually testing a few different locations in. Should it have been the Ballykelly area? So, whilst I'm making my remarks, Chairperson, I have no disrespect. People of Ballykelly deserve that, maybe more than we did need it in Belfast. However, I am concerned that we actually just looked at one site. We can't demonstrate the value for money, and I'm concerned at how the Minister just seemed to push through her wish list from day one, even against others who were making noises at that particular time.
Okay, Trevor. Michael?
Thanks. It's along similar lines. If I read this correctly, it would appear that in strictly financial terms, staying in a refurbished Dundonald house would actually be less expensive. And that makes me wonder how we as a Public Accounts Committee balance notional things like redistribution, because public accounts is pretty hard and fast, and how do we put a value on meeting the Programme for Government commitment as opposed to the more real thing possibly of hard cash?
Okay, Trevor, you want to back in there?
I felt I've given someone who represents a rural constituency, and I think Belfast has done too well this last 30, 40 years in terms of where jobs have been centralised. So, I mean, I take Michael's point in terms of the cost of Dundonald House. But in terms of Ballykelly, the purpose was to decentralise jobs in which any of us who serve rural constituencies would welcome, rather than people travelling from the northwest and even the South Antrim travelling into Belfast. I think it makes sense for those in terms of the economics for their cost of living for those individuals. The bit that still, Chairperson, and I mean, I think this, maybe I'd like Kieran maybe to address this, in terms of the business case for this and other sites, it was exploration of other sites concerns me. Should it have been Ballykelly or anywhere else in the rural part? The very fact that they've just looked at the Ballykelly site on its own and have ruled anything else out. And I mean, I'd like Kieran maybe to maybe address that if that was possible.
Okay, I'd like Kieran, will you comment?
Those options are being assessed would be a number of locations, and that's precisely what's given rise to this this direction. So there was really one other option, which was a baseline in terms of refurbishing Dundonald House, and Dundonald House needs a major refurbish. But if the objective then is to relocate, then you know, a refurbished Dundonald House doesn't satisfy that objective. So concur with the point Mr. Clark has made. So normally you would expect a wider range of options.
Thank you, Mr. Donnelly. Trevor, you wanted to...
Chairperson, I mean, I think and it's well known, well publicised in relation to other job losses in the North West region. Indeed, there was a debate in the Chamber in relation to the tax office in terms of the loss of jobs there. So we're still talking about the North West. It could have been looked at an option, but for some reason there's tunnel vision in terms of this one site-specific location, and I think there's been an opportunity missed. There was an awful lot of people who have lost jobs in relation to in Coleraine in terms of, and I'm not here to champion Coleraine. I'm still
glad you are, but
no, but I'm accepting the point that I think we had to decentralise. I'm just really concerned how the Minister done a solo run here to get the jobs out of Belfast, yes, but just to look at one site whenever, in terms of the North West, there was other sites that they could have looked at, and I think maybe the Audit Office should still be putting the mark down in relation to that.
Okay, thank you, Trevor. Thank you, Kieran. No other comments, Member Mr. Dallett, Deputy Chairperson.
My only comment would be, as Public Accounts Committee, we have got to differentiate between our role, which is to scrutinise how public money is spent, and to be careful not to intrude too far into what were essentially a number of political decisions. The First Minister decided to buy the site, even though there was a ministerial directive, because the decontamination factor is unknown. That was done. The Minister for Agriculture indicated preference for Ballykelly. That was endorsed by the Executive. You know, and those are very powerful decisions, all three of them. So I'm not sure. I mean, I don't take exception to anything that Trevor's saying, but I think our role is to ensure that, given the information we now have, that some PAC in the future, which might be beyond 2020, will be able to evaluate whether the intentions of the department were actually carried out. I hope, you know, I'm making it clear to other members that we don't stray into political decisions. And I'm not talking about the Minister on her own, I'm talking about the Executive, I'm talking about the First Minister, who I know was involved in buying the site. My main interest would be to know what's going to happen to the remainder of the site, because there's something like 900 acres in there, and I know there were 64 expressions of interest. And certainly I do think that's something that, you know, would interest us. But if government departments are prepared to take risks, put in paper what they intend to do, then I think it's just our job to see that they actually carry it through, and criticise them if they make a blunder.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Chairperson. Trevor, then Chris.
I feel just I want to go back in terms of what John said. I mean, I'm not turning this into a political argument. And I want to maybe correct something that John said that might be inaccurate. That the First Minister didn't buy the site. First Minister and the OFMDM was gifted the site.
Sorry.
So There
That's
is,
wrong,
there is a
you're
distinct,
right.
there is a distinct difference between buying something and giving something. So I'm not trying to suggest that Ballykelly isn't a good site. My concern is, and this is where I think I'm in the right area in terms of the Public Accounts Committee, that that government department didn't give an options, it hadn't actually an options in terms of weighing them up against other sites. There were site specific in that one, or Dundonald House, so they were only half-hearted and actually moving out of Belfast to go out to a rural part, and they were going to the gifted site as opposed to the site that the First Minister bought. And I have to commend obviously the First Minister getting something from nothing from the British Government at the current time.
Chairperson, the word buying was probably wrong, but maybe it wasn't all that wrong. As I understand it, there was a bid from the private sector for $1.25 million, and I think correctly the First Minister decreed that that was grossly undervalued. So, you know, if you want to be flexible for the term buy, although he didn't actually pay anything for it, he decreed that rather than accept 1.25 million from somebody, whoever it was, and you know, that was a political decision. There's a ministerial directive on it. The accounting officer said, "I'm not taking responsibility for it," and you know, that's the role of government. That's what men like the First Minister are in it for, and the Minister for Agriculture and the Executive. And they've made a decision to take a risk. I honestly don't think we have a role, other than, as I say, somebody in the future to make a judgment on whether it was value for money or not.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Chairperson. Chris, and then we're going to move on to our next item of business.
Thanks, Chair. It's just really to come in the back of what John said there originally. You know, I see it, you know, often we bemoan the fact that departments can seem to take an age to get on with things, and when we talk about public procurement and anything else. And for me here, we have an executive minister taking a decision and selecting an executive-owned site and getting on with it. And just in the back of John, I think we should note this, and I think it'll be for others in years to come to see the good value or not.
Okay, thank you, members. And again, the auditor and his staff will continue to monitor the progress on this and give a report back maybe sometime going into the future, if that's possible. Yeah.
At some stage.
At some stage, yeah.
Back on this.
Okay, thank you, members. Moving on to agenda item 6 is our inquiry into the future impact of borrowing and private finance commitments on the Belfast Metropolitan College Titanic Quarter PPP project. Members, in the event that there's no quorum later in the meeting, can I seek agreement from members to write out to the department for any further information if it is required? Yeah. This will allow for the evidence session to continue if the quorum is lost. Okay, members, we'll turn our attention to the evidence session for today. Do any members wish to declare an interest in this matter? No? Okay, members, today, you are all very welcome, panel. We have with us today Mr Derek Baker, who is the Accounting Officer for Dell, Ms Murray Trez McGivern, the Principal and Chief Executive of BMC, Ms Elaine Harton, Chief Operating Officer of BMC, Mr Tom Redmond, who is the Head of Further Education Estates Branch, and Mr Pat O'Neill from the Strategic Investment Board. So thank you for joining us once again today. You are all very welcome to our committee. And can I just give my apologies to the panel on our last evidence session? I had to leave early, so my apologies for that. And thank the Deputy Chairperson for taking over that day.
Oh, all right.
Members, you will find biographies for all our witnesses at page 21 to 26 of your electronic packs. Before we can start our questioning, can I draw your attention, members, to correspondence that is on page 27 of your pack? And the correspondence relates to the committee's request for information on the breakdown of construction costs for the two bids and the shadow bid model. And that's at page 27. Are members content to note this correspondence and that those members who will be asking questions on this particular issue can probe this further during their questioning of the witnesses? Can I get an agreement on that? Agreed? Okay. So members, in your green confidential packs you will find correspondence from Mr Baker dated the 15th of September in relation to the sale of College Square East. This follows the correspondence of the 8th of September that is also in your packs and relates to the commercial confidentiality of the details of the sale. So for those members who haven't, who just want to glean over it, it's just to note at this stage. So members, and it is it's the correspondence dated the 15th of September. Okay, members, moving on. Can I start this session by asking a number of questions in relation to the sale of the buildings at Brunswick Street and College Square East, and also on the role of the Strategic Investment Board in this PPP project? I will then ask the Deputy Chairperson to come in with his questions later also, as he indicated that he would also wish to speak to questions in relation to the role of the SIB. Okay, members, moving on. Although the detail of the possible sales of these two properties is largely commercial in confidence, can you give, and this is directed to Mr Baker, can you give any indication of whether the sales will make significant inroads towards recovering the 20 million of taxpayers' money spent on the project, and is the shortfall as significant as the department had anticipated?
Thank you, Chair. Just on your first point about the commercial confidentiality, I subsequently wrote to you as Chair to indicate that we had taken legal advice, and now that the sale had gone through, there wouldn't be commercial confidentiality surrounding those who had made the sale and the amounts involved, and that would be a matter of public record. So just so that there's no misunderstanding about the commercial confidentiality about that, I mean, it's totally open knowledge now. With regard to the income received, the members of the committee will have seen that the income received from the sale amounts to £5.5 million. And obviously, as you've suggested, or as you've indicated, that falls far short of the amount that would have been received had the properties been sold some time ago. So far as the department's budget is concerned, the department has long recognised that the receipts from the sale of these properties would obviously not reach the valuation which was put on the properties quite some years ago before the property crash, and the department has budgeted accordingly and has made provision for that. So that hasn't adversely affected any other capital projects which have been run by the department. So there is a big shortfall in terms of the difference between the receipt and the difference and the amount that was paid by way of capital payments on this project, but the department has long recognised that that would be the case.
Okay, just taking account of retaining the two buildings and the other costs associated, what would you assess as the overall cost to the department in terms of the college project overall?
Well, as we explained last time, a decision was taken in December 2006 to remove the disposal of the two surplus properties from the PFI deal. So from that point in time, the assessment of the value for money of the PFI deal excluded consideration of those properties. The PFI deal value for money assessment did, however, fully factor in the increased capital payment which was associated with the deal, initially the £10 million, and then later the increase of that to £15 million. And that was fully considered in the value for money assessment and the benchmarking of that assessment against the shadow bid model. And that value for money assessment did show a positive economic advantage in pursuing the procurement route, which was subsequently decided upon.
Okay, thank you, Mr Baker. I will be coming back with questions later. Moving on, members, we've had the opportunity to ask questions of the witnesses. So moving on, I will be calling on Mr Ross Hussey and Mr Michael Copeland to cover the governance arrangements questions.
Thank you, Chair. From what we can see here, BMC did not have a robust estate strategy in place. So how can this be considered acceptable given the amount of money involved in the project? And the audit trail was found to be lacking. Again, how can that be considered to be acceptable?
Will I take that, Chair, initially, and I might ask Mary-Therese McGibbon to comment from the college's perspective. The Audit Office report quite rightly found that the audit trail, particularly for the schedule of accommodation, was poor. The documentation was hard to follow. That said, it is not the case that there wasn't a huge amount of work invested in developing the schedule of accommodation. In fact, there were 42 files and folders worth of documentation. The difficulty for the auditors, and I have every sympathy with them, is that they could not pick their way through that to find a clear audit trail. However, a very, very detailed schedule of accommodation was developed. It was developed for the tender stage of the process. It was developed for the outline business case stage of the process, and it was developed for the contract stage of the process in great detail. And the detail of that schedule of accommodation has indeed permitted the college, through the contract management in the construction phase, to ensure that was delivered exceptionally successfully, and to control the costs and to control any changes. So I fully accept that the paperwork wasn't in the shape it should have been, but the work was done in great detail. And indeed, in terms of outcomes, the schedule of accommodation resulted in the specification of a building which has met requirements and has been operating at capacity and has attracted the number of students which was predicted. Sorry, I've just lost sight of the other aspect of your question. It was the estate strategy.
Yeah.
Sorry, apologies. On the estate strategy point, it is also not the case that the college ignored estate strategy. I think the audit report makes very clear that when the governing body was considering estates and was initially considering whether to proceed with this project, it did have before it an estate strategy which covered all of the main issues that should have been covered. Now, I fully accept that the estate strategy in place in 2003, when they're looking at this, didn't align entirely with the guidance on an estate strategy which the department issued in 2004. And indeed, if we roll back to that timing, I suppose the department created difficulties because in issuing its estate strategy guidance in 2004, the department at precisely the same time issued the executive strategy, Further Education Means Business. And this was a radical new strategy for the whole further education sector. And an integral part of that new strategy was a very radical rationalisation of the whole further education sector from 16 separate colleges right down to 6 colleges to be achieved within 3 years. So all of the focus of the colleges was really concentrated at that time at making good that rationalisation. You can imagine the upheaval. And the department accepted it would not have been realistic or appropriate to expect a number of colleges which were going to disappear as separate entities to invest time, effort and energy in developing a new estate strategy, when that really would have been a matter for the new governing bodies of the new 6 colleges which were to come into being in August 2007. I suppose the analogy, or an analogy, might be the rationalisation of local councils from 26 to 11. You couldn't really expect the 26 councils to develop community plans in advance of the 11 councils springing into action.
I want to come back just briefly. I mean, you've accepted that the audit trail wasn't what would have been expected.
I absolutely accept that.
I mean, obviously, if I, as someone who had come along to do an audit trail, you would expect certain things to be in certain places. So how would that have been allowed to actually happen? Whenever the Northern Ireland Audit Office really had a difficult job, how then could yourselves oversee this whenever there may have been files for everything?
Yeah.
But clearly when you would have the same level of expertise as the Audit Office, how was that allowed to actually happen?
Well, if we can reflect for a moment on what we're dealing with here, we're dealing with a schedule of accommodation for a further education college. Now, that is an extremely complicated piece of work, because when you're dealing with further education, it's an awful lot different from dealing with a school. You're dealing with the schedule of accommodation for a facility which involves full-time students, part-time students, evening students, short courses, recreational courses, academic courses. So a huge amount of work goes into that. We didn't have the fancy IT systems then to gather all of that up easily. So there was a huge amount of engagement between the college management staff, the individual lecturers, the individual heads of department, and that information was built up through an iterative process and recorded in various files, and that resulted in the schedule of accommodation. So I accept the building up of that documentation wasn't presented in a neat format in which the auditors could go through from A to Z and say, yeah, that's exactly what happened when. But the end product was a very detailed and effective and fit-for-purpose schedule of accommodation. But, I mean, I know I'm hogging the discussion here. I don't know whether anyone from the college wants to comment. Sorry.
Mr. Clark just wanted on there for a small supplementary.
I don't know if you can answer this, Derek, or maybe it's Elaine. In terms of that schedule of accommodation, would the IT been included in that?
No.
Wouldn't?
Well, sorry. I'm making a guess and saying no. I'll ask Elaine to comment on that.
Picking up on this, the schedule of accommodation is effectively the room layout for the building.
Yeah.
And it is driven by standards set down by the ETI, which allow for full-time students certain amount of space, and for specialist areas certain amount of space. So it's driven by the number of students and the type of students we have and the type of facilities on offer. So, for example, the space that you would be allocated for catering areas would be significantly larger than that you would be allocated for a standard classroom. The schedule accommodation focused only on the actual building and the accommodation that was needed for the build. The IT requirements came outside and after that.
Would you like any further comment in terms of the IT provision?
The IT provision was outside the original business case for the PFI deal, in line with guidance from Treasury. And the reason for that is because IT has a very short life and requires replacement, so it's not ideal to put into a long-term contract such as PFI. In terms of the IT, the college developed the IT business case it was submitted in May 2011, which set out all of the network infrastructure that was required, what we call the first fix, all the wires that would have gone into the wall, and then all of the hardware, so the PCs and software.
So that was that in part of the original business case, or
no?
Not?
It was a completely separate business case.
Well, I can understand. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I can understand in terms of the life expectancy of the equipment.
Yes.
But the cabling wouldn't have changed. So why would that not be included in the original price?
I think IT was excluded. To be honest, Trevor, it's to do with the Treasury guidance in and around that. And the way the contract was set up, the college provided the infrastructure that went in. Sorry, Tom, you can correct me on this. The contractor provided to a point on the wall?
All of the infrastructure. It was the loose fittings, the desktops, and the things that plug in that came separate in the IT business case. What was in the PPP project was the actual wiring and all of the plugs and all of the infrastructure. It was there.
Okay.
Just to follow up, Mr. Clark, I mean, I think, as Elaine said, the Treasury guidance is very explicit that IT projects should not be included in a PFI because of difficulties of transferring the risk for refreshing.
And I mean, just to add to that, I think there were capability issues which are well documented in the college in terms of being able to get that IT specification and business case together. So there was a delay, and
sorry,
I accept that.
There was a problem, capability problem.
There was a capability.
What was that?
Well, the capability problem that I identified when I went in November 2009 was that I had no accountancy help whatsoever. We didn't employ one qualified accountant in a business of 60 million, which I found quite difficult to deal with. So we had to put a lot of things.
Can I just go into that slide?
Sorry, Trevor.
Well,
Sorry. No, you're fine. You're fine. Just the Hansard are finding it very difficult to pick up the mics from the witnesses. So can we just pause for a second till Danielle and Darren adjusts the mics? Just that they're finding it difficult to pick up. Right, continue on. Thank you.
So what
difficulty? Sorry. Yeah.
Well, what I was saying was, the department, as you know, instigated an efficiency review on the organisation, and that efficiency review did say that there were significant capability issues in various parts of the organisation, which we had to address by the development of a college improvement plan, which we did, and it was approved by the department in 2010 in November of that year. Part of that was the restructuring, and it allowed us then to
So can I stop you there, Mary, please? In terms of that lack of accountancy within the organisation, a multi-million pound organisation, if they had been in place, would they have been involved in the contract?
They certainly would have been involved in drawing up the business cases and doing a lot of the background work which is required in putting through, good contract
And would you see that as a failure, the fact that they weren't there or weren't involved?
Well, I think it was just part of the whole difficulty in the organisation. All these things are in the public domain. The efficiency review is there. It was finally published in January 2010, but the department had instigated it at the end of 2008. So, the trail of difficulties, which really came, I think, as a result of the merger, were, we were living with those as undercurrents.
If you were to identify someone in terms of that failure, who was responsible or who should have made sure that that gap had been filled, who would that have been?
Well, my mother always tells me it takes two to tango.
Well, tell me two people, and I don't mind.
No, well, I it's not a names scenario. I think
Positions
that
will do then.
things,
Positions will do.
two organisations come together. They don't do, in my view, the correct due diligence. They don't get to know each other. They create a marriage which, at best, was
Civil partnership.
a bit of a,
Yeah.
well, maybe a shotgun wedding. And it just took a while to unravel the difficulties which emerged from that merger to the situation we're in today, which I think is much better than we were.
So you would acknowledge that some of those problems could have led, in terms of even to the awarding this contract and the criticisms that the Audit Office has in relation to that?
Well, I think that no one was disagreeing with the efficiency review. We accept the difficulties that were in the college. That's documented.
I'm more focusing in terms of the procurement and how we actually arrived in terms of this location and this particular contract and how it was awarded and the problems around that.
Well, what I would say, Mr. Clark, is that if the suggestion is that the slowness or the lack of, or the time that was taken to do the contract, if one of the factors in that was capability issues within the organisation, both in the governing body and in the staff, then yes.
You're acknowledging that?
That is absolutely acknowledging that. I think that is one of the factors.
Yeah, okay. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you, Mr. Clark. Mr. Hussey, you finished?
No, I want to go
More
back again
questions?
here then.
Okay,
I want
thank
to
you.
keep on the estate strategy. So on page 69 of the report, appendix 3, you have made various comments about the estate strategies. So would you agree with me that unlike this project, the estate strategy should be fully documented and supported with an adequate audit trail? And can you confirm to me that they were in place for the projects that are listed in appendix 3, which you have there in front of you?
Sorry, all of the projects for all of the colleges?
Yeah.
No, I can't confirm that today, Chair.
Or can you confirm it to the chair?
I will. I can't comment on each of the other individual projects, some of which predated this one. So we need to bear in mind that some of these projects predated even the issue of guidance on an estate strategy. I can confirm that the college had in place an estate strategy when the decisions were taken about the Belfast Metropolitan Titanic Quarter campus. They did have an estate strategy.
And again, whenever we're going back to mention audit trails, we're asking, obviously, for adequate audit trails. But maybe you would comment on what you believe the audit trails to be, because clearly in the first one, you accept that it wasn't the easiest of audit trails to follow.
Absolutely right.
Okay.
And I think, I don't know whether Elaine would want to comment on that. It's sort of her paperwork, but I'm commenting on third hand on the paper trail within the college.
Well, again, with your background, clearly, from what I've seen, you would have a similar background to our audit office officials. What was your opinion of the audit trail?
I think the audit team would agree with this. When I first got involved in responding to the auditors, I sat down with our team, and there was a lot of work going in to generate and provide the information.
She did many times.
I won't. I don't need to disclose that. What I did say whenever we sat down with the team and we worked there, I said, look, we're not disagreeing that we've ended up with the right product at the out that's being used and is effective. What we're discussing here is the quality of the audit trail, and we both concluded that was the issue. It was difficult to follow. It was difficult to work its way through. So absolutely, the audit trail was not what I would expect, and it is not something I would accept from my teams today.
Can I ask if Tom can make a comment in response to Mr. Hussey's question?
Yeah.
Mr. Hussey has asked about all the other projects in Appendix 3, and some of them obviously predated the guidance to which we are referring, which was issued by the Department in relation to estate strategies in 2004-2005. But what I can assure the committee is that each of these projects had a schedule of accommodation, i.e. the amount of teaching space and other space that was specified within the project that was appropriate to the number of students in the college at that time. And each of the schedules of accommodation, including the one that for this current project, was signed off by the Education and Training Inspectorate as being the right type of accommodation, the right amount of accommodation, commensurate with the student numbers that were being taught and trained across the different vocational areas.
My concern from what I do see clearly relates to audit trails and clearly relates to what one person might find acceptable, but to me it is something that should be clear and easily understood, that the audit office can go in and give a clean bill of health. That is my main concern. And if somebody has to go and find 18 files to get the answer to one question, I personally would find that totally wrong. I'm sure it doesn't happen today. It shouldn't have happened then. With my background in business, I wouldn't have got away with it.
Yeah, and what I can add to what I've already said is that since, and Derek has referred to it earlier, our IT systems are much more sophisticated now in dealing with converting enrolments into full-time equivalent students. As Derek has alluded to, students in FE colleges can be 6 hours a week for 6 weeks a year, and adding up and converting all of those into full-time equivalents in a paper system was convoluted and was difficult, and obviously was difficult to follow. But we have refined our systems and we can download it electronically, and we've been supported with assistance from the Strategic Investment Board in upgrading and updating those systems to enable us to provide a more clear audit trail. But again, the other assurance I want to give the committee is that, as Derek alluded to, that the number of students that we created this building for is the number of students that are currently using it. So however we got there, it seems to have been the right number, and I hope that the committee can take some assurance from that.
And not a trail in a packet of cigarettes or something, no, but
Sorry, just to come back in and again to give further assurance to the committee. Marie-Therese and I had an audit committee last night, and we got our internal audit assurance for the college last night, and we got a substantial internal audit assurance rating. 4 years ago, that rating was limited, which I think shows the journey, and that these are the types of things that will not happen again in the college.
Thank you. Mr. Clark just wanted in there.
Yeah, it was something in response to Liam. I have to say I was drawn by your honesty, which is unusual for me whenever there's witnesses come up to say whenever the defendant's on. But I was drawn by your honesty in terms of why she wouldn't go on audit knowledge she actually cried, which I mean I wouldn't want to be in that position. But in terms of, so we're talking about the audit trail, we're talking about the paperwork, and that's where you were honest in terms of it's not where you would like it to see. In your honest opinion, would you actually believe that it is actually, now that you've seen what you have, that it does demonstrate value for money against the other bid?
I think in terms of the numbers that are set out in the process that's been followed, all of the business cases went through due process and demonstrated that the preferred bidder and the bid that we got was the preferred option within those business cases. And I spent a lot of my life writing business cases and working through them and understand the robustness of the process, and also the robustness of the process that comes through from departmental and DFP economists as they challenge and go through. So given that all the business cases came out demonstrating that this was the project with that gave the best value for money, yes.
Well, can I just put a caveat down? I'll ask you a question towards the end of the process again today, given some of the questions that some of our members want to ask, and see what your response is there.
Thank you. Mr. Copeland.
Thank you, Chair. Very good. with your permission, I'll address my questions to you, and you can field them as you deem to be appropriate. I would draw your attention to page 34, footnote 39 of the report. In particular, the last sentence, which appears to indicate at the time and currently the department had not specified targets for space utilisation. In your view, is that an omission? Was it something that should have been in the matters that we have just discussed? Could I ask, assuming that that is correct, and I have no reason to think it's not, how did the department satisfy itself that the college was making the most effective use of their buildings?
Sorry, can you refer me to the paragraph again, Mr. Copeland?
It's the footnote 39 on page 34.
Sorry, I missed you saying footnote. Yeah, I mean, that is correct. The department had not specified that, but...
Should that have been part of an estate strategy, or is that a separate thing?
Well, the department subsequently issued guidance on an estate strategy, and it wants all of these things to be covered in the estate strategy. So, I mean, you move on over time and you improve your procedures and you improve your guidance. What I would say is that, and Tom alluded to this, there has been much greater sophistication introduced into the public sector, and I don't just mean the further education sector, but the public sector right across the board, with the help of the Strategic Investment Board and the Asset Management Unit. And we now have an asset management strategy for the whole public sector estate. And an integral element of that new strategy is about getting the best of space utilisation, creating the kind of benchmarks so that we can compare the usage of one building against another. And we're actually in the process of refining space utilisation benchmarks for the further education sector. Now, you gave me the option, Mr. Copeland, kindly, of handing off questions to people. We have Pat O'Neill here from the Strategic Investment Board, and with your permission, I'll ask Pat to say a wee bit more about the work of the Asset Management Unit in that regard.
No, I understand that, and I have no issue with that at all, Pat. What I'm really asking is, was there a reasonable expectation or requirement that specific targets for space utilisation should have been A, in existence, B, taken into account and actioned on, or is that applying the circumstances of today to something which is historical? In other words, should it have been done? If it wasn't done, why was it not done? And just to round it off, do we have comparative data for all of the colleges within the FE sector?
Okay.
And can it be provided to us?
Okay. Well, just on your first point, I mean, as Tom has said, on the accommodation for this project, and indeed every project in the further education sector, we were not shooting in the dark. You know, we had the Education and Training Inspectorate inspecting what was produced to make sure that it was reasonable, in line with the best guidance that was available at the time. Now, that guidance has continually been updated and refined over time. So there is some assurance.
Did that guidance at the time include space utilisation as a separate standalone heading?
Well, it would have. I can't answer that. What I can say is that it did include guidance on what the appropriate space should be for a given number of students. But there wasn't a target in there for space utilisation. Tom, can you pick up?
Should there have been?
Sorry, Mr. Copeland. In the schedule of accommodation for further education colleges 1996, which is mentioned in the first line of footnote 39, there is specified utilisation rates that are our target rates, and those would have been taken into consideration in the amount of accommodation that would have been awarded on foot of the number of students studying in the different areas at that time, to come to the conclusion of what was actually needed in those projects. What the line, the last line you're referring to, requires that we looked at the number of students, we built the building. Did we have ongoing specified targets for space utilisation? We didn't at that time, but we have developed those, and that's the work that we've done with the SIB. And on an ongoing basis, we look at the amount or the number of students that are accessing these facilities, comparing square metres of accommodation, teaching accommodation, and other accommodation like large space libraries, etc. And comparing that to the number of FTEs that are in each college. That would alert us on an ongoing basis to if a college is perhaps too cramped, or perhaps if a college is underutilised, and perhaps a campus or whatever could be made surplus to requirements.
So that's really assessing the college against a predicted number of students as opposed to an actual. Is that correct?
Well, we build any new building on the actual number of students plus any refinements that we might do to that in terms of areas specified for growth, population, demographic trends, etc. So a new building is built on the actual number of students, but the space utilisation, as you can imagine, a building will be there for 40 or 50 years. It's measuring the utilisation on an ongoing basis, where there were perhaps some deficiencies previously that we have been working to address.
And are there buildings currently within the overall family of further education where the data would be available currently?
The data is available across all colleges and all campuses,
including Belfast Metropolitan.
Including Belfast Metropolitan.
Thank you.
Okay,
Do you want to come in, Pat, since you were sort of rodeoed there? You look very anticipated.
Thank you, Michael. I just covered the work that SIB are doing supporting the department in relation to FE colleges. The basis for this is we're trying to bring an evidence-based approach using quite a lot of analytics to predict more accurate numbers. So if you're doing a business case now, one of the first sections in the business case is the need or demand section. The challenges facing colleges is that you have different types of students, you have different numbers of students. So if you take a college in September, how many students will be in the class? What's the attrition rate? How many fall off over the year? What do you actually provide for? There are things like, we know, block courses, day courses, courses undertaken within, for instance, TransLink undertake their training within their own environment, but it's done by the colleges. So what we aim to do, and we're doing this in conjunction with Queen's University, the maths department there, is we've built a model to plan and map out that need and demand, and to put as much evidence underneath that.
Maybe I've read the wrong report, but I think we're getting off on a tangent that's not really relevant to what we're trying to focus on in terms of the contract. I respect, I'm not being rude to one of the witnesses, but it's really not relevant to what we're trying to drill down into here. Can I bring us back to reality about what we're talking about?
With respect, I suppose he was responding, Mr O'Neill was responding to...
Well, I think Mr Baker tried to bring him in there to maybe send us off on one. I think, I don't know what he's playing at. But
sorry, I mean, I wasn't deliberately trying to digress now, Mr.
It felt like that.
I think you know that.
Okay, sorry.
But can I just ask, I mean, because...
Michael, are you finished?
No, I've another two, but they're on.
Keep them on track, Michael.
Can we just let Michael finish, Trevor, and then we'll bring you in?
The answers got rather convoluted. Since 2003, public bodies have been required to include a benefits realisation plan in conjunction with them to support business cases. It seems that the college was slow to produce such a plan, with it only being finalised in 2011. How did the department allow it to get to that situation in the absence of that? And how can there be any objective assessment of projects when there are no baselines set at the outset?
Okay, two things. The college actually did have a benefits realisation plan, but the Gateway reviews did identify that it could be improved. The second Gateway review, which I think was conducted in June 2005, and the third Gateway review in June 2008 also acknowledged that there was a benefits realisation plan. So there was a benefits realisation process in place, and there was a benefits realisation plan in place. But the Gateway Review did what the Gateway Review is supposed to do. It identified the need for improvements. And the college reached the point where, by the Gateway 4 review, the Gateway identified that the college had a benefits realisation plan, which was an exemplar, and contained a raft of measures which could be used to assess the benefit of this project, both in quantitative terms and in qualitative terms. And those measures do allow the college to assess the benefits of this project benchmarked against what went before across a number of dimensions which are relevant to the project objectives, such as student satisfaction, student attainment, which is the ultimate outcome measure of this, staff satisfaction, engagement with business and other clients and so forth. So I think the report does acknowledge that the college currently has an exemplar benefits realisation plan. There were benefits realisation in place, but they weren't as sophisticated as they should have been, and the Gateway reviews identified the need to refine those further.
Lastly, would you, in the light of what you've just said, disagree with the view of the Audit Office that a benefits realisation plan should have been in place, which you said is? Can you give any indication as to how they arrived at the view, perhaps, that it wasn't? And explain why it took so long to finalise the plan in the format in which they were expecting it to be finalised, given its importance to the delivery of the project?
Yeah, well, first of all, I agree entirely with you that benefits realisation is very, very important. I mean, it's a point worth noting. I don't know whether the Treasury Officer of Accounts is here. He is. I think that the final guidance on wrapping a benefits realisation plan into a business case emerged in about 2009. As late as that, bear in mind, the business case for this, the outline business case, was done in 2004. But
finalised in 2011, would that be correct?
So the benefits realisation, but what I'm saying is that, you know, the guidance that a benefits realisation plan should be included in a business case, that guidance was finalised in 2009. But no, I take your point entirely. I fully accept the need of benefits realisation. I accept that. And I accept the fact that the successive Gateway reviews, Gateway 2 and Gateway 3, acknowledged that improvements could be made to the benefits realisation process. However, there was a process in place, the college refined it, and it ended up with a document and a plan which is exceptionally fit for purpose and which allows the college to monitor the benefits of this, benchmarked retrospectively against what went before. And I think that's a very, very important point. The other point is this, I mean, look at the nature of the project, and I accept that, you know, each project is different, but what was happening during the period 2009 to 2011, a building was being built. You can't actually measure during that period the satisfaction of students, the satisfaction of staff, the satisfaction of business, the inclusivity of the college, whether it's attracting people from all communities, whether it's attracting people from West Belfast and so forth, which are amongst the benefits that are being measured as part of the benefits realisation plan. But point of principle, I agree with you entirely. Benefits realisation, really important, and the sooner it is done, the better.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Baker. Mr. Mike Brennan is here on behalf of the Treasury Officer of Accounts, who is Mr. Jack Lavery. Mike, do you want to make a comment on that?
Thank you, Chairperson. Just to confirm that the point Mr. Baker makes about the DFP guidance on benefit realisation plans is indeed correct. DFP guidance on what a benefits realisation plan should look like. The definitive guidance didn't really issue until 2009. Up until that stage, the previous DFP guidance, what was the 2003 practical guide, really just said that benefits realisation should be set out briefly as part of an options analysis. So until 2009, there was no definitive DFP guidance on benefits realisation plans. After the guidance was issued, the significant improvement in this project's benefits realisation plan was reflected in the commentary on the Gateway report review. The other point to make is that in many ways benefits realisation plans are part of an ongoing process in terms of PPPs. So for example, over the cycle of the contract, it wouldn't be unrealistic to expect the department and the college to revisit the benefits realisations just to quantify, you know, what the final outcome actually is.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Brennan. Okay, thank you, Mr. Copeland. Trevor, you're happy enough? Deputy Chairperson, Mr. Dallett.
Thanks. Mary Therese, in your opening remarks, you made comparisons to a shotgun wedding. Forgive me for raising that and for asking the obvious question, who was providing marriage guidance?
Well, you know, I think that personally I wanted to come in 2009 into the FE sector because I thought it was a very vibrant and a very dynamic sector, and I think that it is that because the department set out in 2004 to completely change the face of what FE was and to develop a new policy platform, which is FE means business. And part of that FE means business was the rationalisation from 16 down to 6. And you'll know, Mr Dollett, that in Northern Ireland, when we try to rationalise anything, then, you know, people don't enter marriages very freely in Northern Ireland. You know, we tend to want to keep everything as it is. So I think there was guidance. I think that the policy platform is there. I think that people, if they were being rational, could see that where we were going with FE would be a better place than where we were at that stage, because there was a vision not just about being more a part of the Northern Ireland, you know, success story, more engaged with industry and with people on the ground, with better facilities and in particular with better buildings. But you know, sometimes, even with all the guidance in the world, people still find it quite difficult to give their space up and say, you know, we'll join together and share. So maybe, you know, in hindsight, I don't know. I don't know how much more the department could have done, because both had their own independent governing bodies who were charged with the merger and its process. And, you know, at times that, and again, this is me reading back into papers and doing that, it wasn't always done potentially in the best way.
Chairperson, I will not carry that analogy any further. I think, I have to say hands up, I'm totally prejudiced in favour of further and higher education. That's where I got my education. And all down through the Troubles and long before it, in times of deprivation, we looked to those colleges, including the ones that have been closed. We looked to them for inspiration. So, Biffy, the Met, whatever, I have the highest regard for it. But I'm trying to get my head around this. We have the experts from that college, the Strategic Investment Board. Now, that's a fairly lofty term. It suggests strategies and all sorts of things. And then, of course, we have the department. And I'm not going to crucify them either. But could somebody tell me how you had these three groups working together got it so horribly wrong?
Can I take that chair in the first instance? I mean, can I maybe beg your indulgence and come back to Mr Dalek and ask what exactly was got wrong?
Well, for example, did anyone see the potential conflict of interest that was arising? Did anyone see, for example, how this Ivy College crowd ran amok and were able to dictate their own terms?
In what way?
Well, the car parking and all that stuff, increased the size of it, up the costs, the whole works.
Well, the car park, the report makes very clear, paragraph 8, paragraph 3.10, neither the college nor the department paid at all for the car park. Didn't pay a penny for the car park. Up the cost, I don't quite know what you mean. The only cost increase throughout the whole project was in respect of the site, rising in cost from 3 million to 5 million pounds.
Yes,
but in
yes.
terms, that's the only cost increase. I mean, I don't. And that was a.
2 million.
Mr Baker, yesterday we got a gloomy report from the Minister for Employment and Learning telling us that projects in the southwest are off the shelf, and of course the north and the northeast and the northwest. £2 million go a long road.
I know that, but
you see,
all of the,
I think unwittingly you're telling us, you know, that there was a flippant attitude towards this, and that every penny didn't count.
Not at all. Not saying that at all. In every decision that was taken in the contract negotiations on this project, there was one objective kept to the fore, and that objective was to ensure that the project was delivered, and in doing so, that the project was delivered in a manner that was affordable, and that the project was delivered in a manner which delivered value for money. And that objective was achieved in every decision that was taken.
So you're not in the least embarrassed by what happened?
I'm not embarrassed by what happened. I'm happy to explain each and every decision that was taken in terms of the investment decisions. There were process issues throughout the process, and Mr Hussey has referred to those and the audit trail, and I'm quite happy to acknowledge that and put my hands up. And other things happened in the process, but in terms of, to quote you, Mr Dallatt, Ivywood Colleges Limited running amok, I really don't recognise that as part of this project. I just don't.
Sorry, Chairperson, I'm not sure Mr Baker's read the report or not, but I'm presuming he has. I mean, it does say the documentation was poor. There was a lack of accounting skills. There was all those things missing, which actually I was alluding to earlier, that the Belfast Met does a superb job with its students and sends them all over the world with the highest skills. Yet all these basic skills seem to be missing in a multi-million project involving the Met itself.
A project which delivered value for money when measured against the shadow bid model and was delivered in an affordable manner and met the project objectives.
But only, and I think the report does acknowledge this, only when the Murray's guidance came in late in the day and saved the project. That's when it happened, and that's not what we're talking about.
Can I supplement that point, John? I think Mr Baker answered a question to you was actually wrong, because he said that their model versus the shadow bid was value for money. Mr Baker then explained the life cycle costs at 6.8 million in terms of your bid, your preferred bidder, the one you're championing today, as opposed to 5.6 million, which was in the shadow bid model. Now, that's an ongoing cost. Yeah. Let's see how you champion that one.
Okay. In a PPP project, you were dealing with both the capital cost and the ongoing service cost, and you wrap them together in a single bid.
Sorry, can I just make a point in relation to that? Mr Clark says that is an ongoing cost. In the letter that we sent to the committee, what we have given is the NPVs of the net present value.
Okay.
And the net present value is actually the stream of costs discounted back to its current value. So it's not
it's not all stand corrected.
It's an
so we'll just take a 6.8 versus the 5.6.
Sorry, and the point. Well, I was going to come to that point. You wrap them together and you come to a net present value of the total project costs, and the net present value of the bid from ICL was lower than the bid from the other competitor, and indeed the shadow bid model. And that is what I mean by value for money. And the report actually makes very clear, and I think it's in the glossary of terms in the report, it describes what a shadow bid model is, and it describes that a shadow bid model is the mechanism against which you assess the value for money and the affordability of a project. And that is exactly what we did in accordance with the guidance from DFP and indeed the Treasury on how you calculate the value of a PFI model.
Chairperson, I want to put the questions maybe to Mr O'Neill.
Mr Dallatt, I think.
Yes,
Mr O'Neill, did you want to come in there just on that?
Yeah.
Go for it.
PFI is basically you package design, build, finance, maintenance and operation into one package.
Yeah.
You can clearly see, and you're absolutely right and proper to see, that there was difference in that particular one you picked out. But when you look at the whole entire package, that's what we look at. What was the best value option for the public purse? And that's the one you have to pay.
And that was based on the original tenders being, in terms of an even playing field. That was before you removed the £10 million that you lost in terms of the two colleges. That was before you decided to enter into other agreements in terms of the car park. That was before the build cost in terms of that college was obviously more expensive, given you put an underground car park in it. You're absolutely right, Pat. So there's £500,000 of difference, but none of those other bits was factored into the other tender.
Right. In relation to the money that went into this project, at the invitation to tender time, we stated that the two buildings, College Square East and Brunswick Street, were in the project. The guidance out there clearly states that if buildings are integral to the project, then they're left in it. After we received our tender from TQL, clearly they didn't want to use any of those sites in their proposition, so those buildings were exchanged for a valuation 10 million. That 10 million valuation, raised in December 06, was a figure that was evaluated by LPS. That's that 10 million.
So-
So it was a swap in exchange
Right,
for.
that's okay. So let's just look at that. So in terms of the other bidder, were they taking those out, or were they using the existing buildings?
The other
Or were you
bidders
based,
were
when you based on the
invited.
10 million? Because, I mean, the problem is you can't have your cake and eat it here. You took the £10 million out. They prepared to take 10 million out. Isn't that what you just said?
What I'm saying is the buildings were exchanged for a figure of 10 million
Yeah.
after the tenders came in. The tenders came in March 06. At the end of that year, those buildings were no longer integral to the project. So best value for money could be achieved by disposing of them in the open market. So they were then valued by LPS and they were exchanged. So the buildings were taken out and 10 million was put in.
In terms of these figures were taken out at this stage, was this before or after?
These figures were the bid stage, which was... What I'm trying to
Sorry, just answer the question. Was these figures before they were taken out or after they were taken out?
These figures, the bid one was in March 06, so it was
Yes,
before.
which was before. So these figures will have changed by 10 million,
No, what I'm saying-
or given what
Sorry,
we've
can
actually
I,
finished
can
up
I
again.
answer that, Ms. Clark?
No, I'm not sorry. I think Pat's doing a good job here. Go ahead, Pat. Because Pat did nod in agreement and was keeping you right the last day, Tom. So we'll have him at the front here today. We'll rather hear from him.
Yeah, well, if
The buildings
Mr.
were
O'Neill.
buildings at this stage. They weren't costed as buildings.
No, they weren't costed as buildings, but they were actually given as a swap. Then the 10 million was applied afterwards,
Yes.
which actually brings the value of what we've finished up with at 10 million more, less what we actually finished up getting for those buildings. Yes?
No. The value,
We'll need a whiteboard here
valuation
shortly.
you can obtain for any asset is at the date in which you wish to sell it.
No,
And when
sorry,
it's surplus-
sorry. You said earlier. Let's take you back to what you said earlier. What you said earlier, whenever you were offered at the bid stage, was the preferred tender were taking these out, so it was included, and that was what was included in terms of that. The 10 million was always coming afterwards, but the 10 million was never realised because the preferred bidder, the road you actually decided to go down, never took those buildings, which was agreed at the start. That 10 million has been taken out, and there's a value applied at that particular time. Your 10 million, and I can't remember what Mr. Baker said in terms of the ridiculous suggestion in terms of the sensitivities around the valuation of these prices, but we didn't raise £10 million. So the difference between the 10 million and what actually was raised should be added to these figures in terms of cost. No?
No, the project will cost what the project costs. So they put in a tender to deliver that project according to the full
Yes,
cost of
with
the
those,
project.
with those buildings removed out and you realising 10 million at a later date.
The buildings were moved out and they were exchanged for 10 million, yes.
Yes, and you didn't get 10 million. So that alters
we
the
didn't.
cost of the total project, and that has to be added in terms of value for money.
The guidance, like the emerging guidance at the time and subsequent guidance in 2007 was to remove buildings that weren't integral to this project. And these buildings were removed following that guidance, or we saw the emergent guidance, but the buildings were removed in line with that guidance.
Can I just bring, Mr. Baker, did you want to come in? I know Mr. Redmond wanted to come in earlier just on that point. So,
Right, well, Chair, thank you. I'll let Tom comment first here.
At all times, Mr. Clark, the two bids were evaluated on a like-for-like basis. So the two bids were evaluated with a price for the properties in, and they were evaluated again.
Well, do you know what would be useful, Mr. Redmond?
Right.
That we actually got a copy of that as opposed to what you've supplied us. Because why are
Sorry,
we...
I supplied what I was asked for, or as close to what I was asked for as I could get.
Well, then I'll pose you a different question. Can you supply us all the information relevant in terms of the before, with the buildings in, the buildings out, and the both, in terms of relation to both tenders?
It can be supplied. It's a huge volume of paper, but it can be supplied.
I'm sure I trust that you'll get something pulled together.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to put it down into a table like this, so as we can understand it, that's fine.
Yeah.
I think it might be difficult.
Just a few seconds and explain. What you have on that bit of paper was as close as I could get to the information that I was asked for in terms of construction and build costs. So I've given you construction and related costs, I've given you life cycle costs and facilities management costs, given you the net present cost of those, and we've given you the comparison across the two bids and the shadow bid. As you can see, the net present cost of the BEP or of the ICL bid was less than the lower of the three figures. But there, and that's part of the financial evaluation. There was also a services, a legal, and technical and quality evaluation. So the whole evaluation process was much larger than the bit that I've put on that bit of paper for you, because that was all that I was asked to provide. So yes, it can be provided, but it was the overall cost that was evaluated between both projects and the shadow bid model, and it was evaluated on a like-for-like basis at all times. Land in, land out, or whatever.
Look forward to seeing the rest of the information.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Chairperson, do you want to continue?
Chairperson, through you to Mr O'Neill. Pat, could you clarify what your role in the Strategic Investment Board was in terms of the bid process, and up to what stage were you advising the college and the department?
As this committee knows, SIB was created in 2003, and its role is to act as an interface between the public and the private sector, and to bring the skills to assist public sectors in the procurement of these projects and other projects. Predominantly, we're to provide advice to the executive in regarding to programmes and projects, and in relation to bodies such as Dell carrying out major investment projects. With their agreement, SIB advises these bodies. In this project, I advised Dell. So I brought my experience and expertise, which was in PFI, to the table.
Now, maybe just further to that, what was your role in promoting the wider Titanic Quarter development plan?
None whatsoever.
So you wouldn't then have perceived any conflict of interest whatsoever?
No interest whatsoever in Titanic Quarter.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Chairperson. Mr Hazard.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks so far. Ms McGivern, if I could take you to paragraph 4.13 of the report. It states there in the paragraph that the college internal team has been credited with achieving a significant turnaround in the project. Why do you think this was the case?
Well, I think there are a number of reasons, and if we go back to the unhappy marriage, you know, the department in
I'm
2007.
sorry, I started
No, it's
this.
all right.
Oh, it was you
because
started
it does work. It was me that started it. If you look at that, the department already by 2008 knew that this marriage was not necessarily working, and they instituted the efficiency review. The efficiency review took place, I think the first draft was there in April 2009, and then the final publication was in January 10. I came in November 2009, and I do have to say that the efficiency review itself was a very good starting point for beginning to really get to the nub of what the difficulties were and how we might set about fixing them. And of course, when I came in, part of the process of doing an efficiency review is that when the efficiency review is delivered, any organisation, in this case the FE College, then has to produce a corporate improvement plan setting out how quickly you will fix these things and whatever. So if you're faced, like I was with the draft, which I was given in November, even though it was publicly published in January, it basically said that there was a root and branch requirement to take the college apart and put it back together again. And there were 72 recommendations. So I had my framework for starting out. I had some assistance in then beginning to take forward a plan to change where we were going, which at that time looked very, very bleak and very difficult, and to turn that round. That was root and branch work. It was very, very difficult work. If you had asked me at the time when I took the job, was I going to have to make the kinds of choices which subsequently I did have to make, obviously in partnership with a governing body and whatever, but just personally, I would have to have said to you that the enormity of the challenge we faced and the very, very difficult decisions that we took were very daunting at times. But we rolled our sleeves up. We got the college to acknowledge that up until then the marriage hadn't been good, and that we actually needed to rethink where we were going, and that we could be the ambitious college which I think we are now. And luckily we were able to bring, I think, most of the staff with us on that, because they too wanted to work in an organisation where they would be proud to come in every morning. But it was root and branch work, and it started with restructuring. We had systems and processes to put into every section. I've already alluded to the absence of things like basic financial abilities and capabilities in the organisation, but that would have been mirrored right across in the planning side, in the way that we did management information. Our IT systems were poor. So it was a very long plan set out in the corporate improvement plan. We were given 3 years to deliver it, and I'm very pleased to say we came out of special measures within 3 years. We had our letter last October from the department telling us that we were, and that was a very significant milestone for the organisation, and an equal one last night when we got the first overall substantial audit report for the whole audit of the, because that's the first one we've had since we started in 2007. So we've come a long, long way. We've still lots more to do, still lots more challenges, but it has been a good journey.
I suppose, in your own words, you use the phrase the root and branch reform. You had to take the college apart and put it back together again. It sounds like there would have had to have been some fundamental lessons learnt. What do you think these were, and have they been disseminated to other bodies?
Well, I mean, we ourselves have drafted, lessons learnt, and you have a copy of the ones which we've learnt about contract management and taking on the building of buildings, and those have been very, very important to us, because when we finished Titanic Quarter, we built a second building. We built at E3, and at this point, I think we can say that E3 was a very smoothly done build. So we learnt a huge amount from what had gone, slower and didn't necessarily work in the first contract. So lessons learnt. I believe our colleagues in FE who are now embarking on their building journeys, and we know that 2 colleges hopefully are going to do that. They are already, in fact, no later than Monday afternoon, we had a workshop with Southern Regional College, giving them the benefit of our learning in terms of both our PFI and our E3 builds. So that is being disseminated, and I think we are used as, certainly, I have to say, if I was charging for the number of people who come from English, Scottish and other colleges to learn how we turned the college round, then the lessons are being disseminated. We're very free with our information and our advice and our help, because we always want to be supportive of other organisations who are having the same difficulties as we had. It is possible to improve, but it takes a lot of energy and stamina and a lot of support from the department, which we got.
Can I just add to that point on lessons learned? I mean, this was a really difficult period for the college, after the merger of the 2 colleges, and it was just a bad time for the college, and the department learned a lot from it too in terms of governance of the further education sector. Now, we did commission the efficiency review, and that was a very, very useful exercise, because it shone a light on all of the things that needed to be done from the department's perspective. And, maybe it sounds a bit sycophantic because she's sitting beside me, but Mary-Therese McGivern and her team did a superb job in taking that efficiency review, which was pretty brutal for the college, and translating it into a college improvement plan and then delivering it within the set timescale. Now, there was a lot of grief along the way, and we were sitting with the college on a monthly basis, overseeing the implementation of that. And we have learnt a lot for the further education sector in terms of governance and keeping close to the further education sector. But Mary-Therese McGivern wouldn't say it, but she and her team deserve a huge amount of credit for what they have done, because it was very difficult. They have turned the college around, they've turned the finances around in the middle of implementing a couple of very big capital projects.
Yeah, one thing that hasn't been done, and it's alluded to in paragraph 4.16, it may have been done now, I want to clear it up actually, is an evaluation of the procurement stage. Has that been done to date?
Evaluation of the procurement stage.
Can I
take that? Yes. Do you want to?
Yes. We have done an evaluation of the procurement stage in the post-project evaluation report, which comes through, and the lessons that come through on that are actually, we shared a draft version with the Northern Ireland Audit Office whenever they were working through the finalisation of this report, and figure 8 of the report, which is on page 59, summarises some of the key lessons coming out of that. Which are really in and around the need for strong and effective project management and governance, careful management of project advisors in terms of working through on that, because the issues related to that have been well documented. The importance of creating a project team with the right skills and experience, which is one of the keys that we were able to apply to the construction phase and that turnaround in the project. The financial and operational benefits around the deductions model and how we work and design in that, and also retaining a project team with continuity from actual contract through construction through operating phase, because those are the individuals who know all of the detail in that contract and are best placed to manage it.
Has that been approved and signed off by the department?
It's
still working. Do you want to comment where the PPE is, Tom?
Yeah, just to add to what Elaine has said, in terms of lessons learned, we would also look at the developments that have happened within PPP procurement. In PPP procurement at that time, we had to follow what was called a negotiated procedure. And those are European-wide regulations that must be followed. Beyond that, we now have developed, those regulations have now developed what's called competitive dialogue. So obviously, procurement and procurement regulations have been updated. So anybody going into a project at this point in time would have to look at, would also have to look at, the type of procurement route chosen within the PPP procurement. I would also say that we would need to look perhaps at whether planning risk should be transferred. Transferring planning risk creates a window of opportunity for things like global property crashes and banking crashes to happen, which occurred during our procurement. We would also have to look at whether you might wish to split up the design and build, the financing and operating disciplines, as the negotiations is significantly complicated by the safeguards that each of these organisations will require to protect their own interests, not only towards the authority but also between themselves. And that led to a lot of the complexity and a lot of the prolongation in the procurement phase as well. So we've looked at all of those things. We've prepared our post-project evaluation, which we're now in the process of finalising. The properties have only recently been disposed of, and the PPE has been updated to take account of that. We have recently received another draft, which we have also shared with DFP, and hopefully in the next couple of weeks or whatever we will be able to finalise and sign that off and have it available for other people and other organisations who might wish to share the pain or the lessons.
It's a matter of weeks then we're looking at here?
It's a matter of
months,
weeks, yes.
Okay, no problem. Moving on, just Ms McGovern, to 4.17. We're looking here at the completion of the Gateway 5 review. Again, has this been completed?
No, Gateway 5 isn't completed yet. We intend to complete it in this academic year. We still have some outstanding information that we'll have to gather. So the PPE, for example, we would want that cleared and out of the way before we would embark on Gateway 5. But we are in absolute preparation for it, and we're confident that we will hopefully achieve another, at least a green amber, as we've done in the previous, certainly in the 4 Gateway, which was a triumph for us.
Okay. Has the financial model been rerun? And just again, this is with 4.17. If we're just hearing that you were awaiting the final rerun of the financial model, just wondering what effect that would have on the unitary charge.
Well, I'm going to ask Elaine to take that because there'll be technicalities in it. It hasn't been rerun yet, but anyway, I'll pass this over.
I'll attempt, and if I get into jargon, stop me immediately, because there's a risk of that. The financial model is the model that the bidder uses, and it is owned by the bidder in order to determine the unitary charge that comes in with the bids. When the contract is complete, there will have been changes through the construction phase where, for example, there might have been a change to certain types of light fittings or things that go through. And in our case, there would be things like floor coverings. So we've discovered, one of the examples is in the hair and beauty area. We changed the floor coverings because what was specified wouldn't have coped with bleaches falling on it as well as what we ended up with. That means there are pluses and minuses as you go through the construction phase, which are monitored through a process. And those are all signed off at the point of the building transferring over. When those transferred over, there were small elements where the building or the project had come in under cost. So life cycle cost came in under budget by 150,000. That's life cycle over the 25 years. And facilities management came in under, and I'm going to sound so anal now, £3,619. Underneath with that, again, over the 25 years. The rerun of the financial model is updating the model with those new costs to do a reassessment of the unitary charge. That has not yet happened, and the report does refer to some difficulties we have been having in contract management. This is one of them. Our belief, given the quantum of those numbers when you run them through, is they will have an immaterial impact on the value of the unitary charge. We have been asking and we have been working with the contractor through the first stage of dispute resolution to get the financial model rerun, and we have been unsuccessful to date. We are currently preparing to move to the second stage on dispute resolution to move that forward in terms of where we are. Our belief is the numbers within that will be immaterial. However, we are managing to the project agreement. We will and we are determined to protect the public sector interest as we go forward, and there are no time-out clauses within the project agreement, so anything we are due, we will get.
Okay. And timeline here for Gateway 5 and the likes of that, what, again, are we looking here at a couple of months, or are we looking at
Well, we would like to be doing the Gateway probably after Christmas.
Okay.
We wouldn't do it before Christmas because it's about a 3-month application process, but we would like to be in a position to be making that application this side of Christmas, so that we would probably do it in the spring. But we already are scheduled in to do the E3 gateway at the same time, so it's difficult doing 2 gateways at the same time because you've got a lot of work. So it's it'll come in the spring, early summer of next year.
No problem. Thanks very much. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hazard. Moving on, Mr. Rogers.
You're very welcome. And just, when we're talking about contract management, and you alluded to that, Elaine, and we know that there were issues with the audit trail and so on, and there are also issues with the procurement. So, for example, on page 61 at the top of the page, not alone are we talking about procurement, but we're talking about timely procurement. And how was this not picked up, that if this was critical, I'm talking about the IT aspect of it, if the IT aspect, if it was critical to the whole delivery of the project, and it was critical on the risk register, why was it not picked up? Why was it just 4 months, there's a business plan put in 4 months before the college opened up? I know it says here there were deficiency in leadership and management within the college, but it's very hard to comprehend this.
Well, I will take it, and absolutely I share Mr. Rogers' view that there were a few surprises when I went in of things that weren't done, and which you would maybe have expected to be a bit further on down the road. I think that when we went in, as I say, when we were faced with the immediate thing that we had to do, which was to create and produce a corporate improvement plan, that in itself took the first 10 months. We were happy at that stage, I think, because the actual building was started and was well in place. And I think our view at that time, given the amount of things that we had to do, we felt we could not necessarily park it, but it was not a priority because we absolutely required, in my view, a much stronger finance side. And at that point, I was very much I had to rely on consultancy in terms of that financial work at that time. And I wanted to be in a stronger position where that financial advice to me was available to me internally in the organisation. So it was a risk, and it was in the risk register as a risk. I think we put our minds to it when we appointed our accountant, our first accountant, and they became a member of staff on February 2011. And we put our minds to it, and we produced the business case as I hoped we would, and I was confident that we would do it. It was a short turnaround, but it went through relatively easily in the end, and of course Elaine was in charge of it because she is the person I'm talking about when we appointed her in February 11. She had previously been part of the consultancy team who came to us in 2010. She loved us so much, she decided to join us. So I already had worked with her for that year, so I was confident that her and the team that she had built around herself could actually deliver it. It was a risk, yes, but I would say it was a calculated risk on our part, and we did deliver it. But if you ask me, is that best practice? No, it's not best practice. And it wouldn't be the way we would do things now. It wasn't how we proceeded with E3. But that's, you know, we learned again lots of lessons, and we did deliver.
Yeah, but there's certainly an acknowledgement that that's not the way you do business today.
Well,
if
no,
there's a risk, you know, having things on risk register is one thing, but if it's a critical things on risk register, it needs to be dealt with at the time. So thank you for that. Mr. Baker, if we can take you on to paragraph, it's still on page 61, paragraph 425, when it talks about the department did consult DFP in May 2011. DFP's advice was not acted upon, as approved was not sought. And then when the Northern Ireland Audit Office began to do this investigation, there was retrospective approval. Why was DFP's advice not acted upon?
There was, at the time of the preparation of the business case for the IT for the college, there was engagement between the department and DFP over whether approval was needed. Now, DFP said to the department, you as a department need to assure yourselves that if you need approval, you obtain it. And the department took the view, incorrectly as it turned out, that it did not need DFP approval because the department assumed that the cost of the IT element of the project was within the acceptable tolerances of a project of this nature, and we didn't need DFP approval. The Audit Office subsequently came along and said, no, you've got that wrong, department, you needed approval for that. So we went to DFP to try to obtain what's called retrospective approval. And DFP granted that retrospective approval. It's not the right way to do business, but they granted it retrospectively on two grounds. First, that an appropriate business case had been carried out. So by appropriate business case, we had established the need, we had established the best option for procurement, and that option established value for money. And the second ground in which DFP approved the business case was that it had been carried out at the right time. What we failed to do, or at least we made the wrong judgment, we took a judgment that we didn't need DFP approval, so we got that judgment wrong. The Audit Office corrected us subsequently.
Right, so there's an acknowledgement of the department's oversight.
Yes.
Is there an assurance that that can't happen again?
There is, well, there is an assurance to the extent that, and Mr. Brennan will know this better than I do, but DFP have very detailed delegations granted to departments. So there's a very long list of items. I think it almost amounts to 70 items where departments need to go to DFP to get written approval for various things. I mean, there's all kinds of things in there like redundancies and write-offs and loans and things. But one of the items in that long list relates to expenditure on IT systems of over £1 million. So I think that's very, very clear now. And to the extent that departments comply with DFP's delegated limits, we will comply. Now, that's not to say that human error won't occur, but it should not occur.
Could I take you then to paragraphs 429 to 431? Where it sets out the college that experienced difficulties agreeing unitary payments. You know, the Titanic campus is in its third year of operation. in practical terms, have the escalation procedures within the contract been, are they sufficiently robust to ensure that contract performance issues are dealt with quickly and effectively?
I'll just make a few comments on that if I can. Mr Rogers, then maybe hand over to Elaine and Marie-Therese because they're actually managing the contract. The contract does provide procedures to deal with a non-provision of service, and there are various penalties that can be applied, and the college is very rigorously and robustly applying that contract and managing that contract. So if any issues arise, the contract provides an opportunity to deal with them and to escalate them. And I think the point that Elaine made is very, very important. Even in the midst of a dispute, if penalties are racking up, they will be recoverable whenever that date is, because there's no time limit on the recovery of penalties. So we acknowledge that there are issues there that need to be addressed, that may need to be escalated, and that, you know, if you take it to its end conclusion, that could take you into the legal sphere. I'm not saying we're at that yet, but I mean those opportunities all exist. But in terms of the day-to-day engagement with the contractor and the contractor and the management of the contract, can I pass you over to Elaine, because that's actually Elaine's task.
Again, your question was, are the escalation procedures in the contract sufficiently robust? There are robust escalation procedures within the contract, and we are currently using the dispute resolution procedure, which initially has an informal process, which then moves into much more formal mechanisms. We believe we're at the point where we are preparing to move to the next stage if we don't get some movement. We're meeting again next week. But in terms of the day-to-day operation of the building and the campus, we are effectively getting most of what we're requesting from the campus, because we wouldn't be achieving satisfaction levels of 92, 93, 94% plus from our students and 100% from our staff if we weren't. We are experiencing difficulties in some areas that were, probably best term is, were snags at the time of us taking over the building. And we have been working with the contractor to get those resolved, and we had a plan for resolution of those in April, May 2012. Unfortunately, the building contractor then went into administration, which meant it got caught up in that administrative process. So the time period we're in has been quite long, and longer than we would have liked. But the reasons for us working through the process and working with them is, every time we go to move, there has been some work in progress. So we've had further work in some of the areas over the summer months. And to give an illustration, an example of the types of areas that we have in it, one of the areas that was not completed to specification is a sound booth, which is effectively a 2-metre squared room which is soundproofed. That has not been available. It has been completed now over the summer months this year. We have made deductions of £10,000 for that not being available. So while we've been experiencing difficulties, we have still been making deductions as we go through the process. The final points around just final ratchets and final mechanisms around that are where we're moving into more formal procedures if we can't get it agreed.
So is it particularly maybe within this last year you're invoking these penalties? We have
been issuing penalties from the very first day and hour. So anything that was unavailable, our contract management is very robust, and I think the Audit Office report highlights the robustness of the management during the construction phase. That same team, it's a dedicated contract team, remain in place. Continue to monitor performance on a monthly basis. We have monthly client liaison meetings. We record any non-performance and we make deductions. What we're doing is refining and completely concretising the values within those, and that's what we haven't been able to do.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah. And just when we're still talking about Unity charges and costs, in Appendix 3 on page 69, maybe you could explain to me what do these charges mean for the department and college's budget?
Well, can I start on that one, Chair?
Yeah.
I mean, the unitary charge is split between the department and the college. I think it's probably explained there in the footnote. The department pays that element of it which would have been attributable to the capital cost, because normally the department would fund the capital cost of a new college, and the college funds out of its resources the resource cost, the revenue cost, if you like. What it means for the department's budget, we pay it every month, and it is affordable. and it has been factored into our budget, so it's not placing any pressure on us. I think the proof of the pudding from the college's perspective is that during the life cycle of this project, post, right up to contract signing and post-contract signing and the construction and now the implementation, the college, as Mary-Therese McGivern has explained, has managed to turn its finances round from a pretty serious deficit position into a break-even position, and that was quite a turnaround. So the project is eminently affordable from both the college's perspective and the department's.
And then in terms of this unitary charges, how does the department make this information available to the Assembly, in particular to Dell?
Well, the department actually doesn't make anything available directly to the Assembly. Ministers report to the Assembly, but the department reports regularly to the Employment and Learning Committee on its budget and the disposition of its budget. Now, if you're asking me, and we provide details, for example, of what we allocate to the further education sector. So, for example, we're going through the process of October monitoring, and we are engaging with the Employment and Learning Committee in great detail on what our budget is for further education and what, if any, cuts might have to be made to that budget, but that's a different story altogether. But we do not tend to break down the individual elements of that budget. We don't say we're giving them this much for students, and we're giving this much for earmarked projects, and we're giving it this much for the unitary charge in respect of this particular PPP, in the same way that we don't break it down for the money that we give to other colleges in relation to a PFI deal. We could do. That information is readily available, and there's no reason why we shouldn't do it. If the committee was interested in it, we would be more than happy to give it to the committee.
But it's broken down college by college?
Well, when we provide information to the committee about the department's budget, we don't actually break down the individual amounts that we give to the individual colleges, but we could do. And within the amounts that we give to the individual colleges, we could break down the individual amounts that we give the colleges in respect of the department share of any unitary charge in respect of a PFI project. That is eminently doable because we record that and we have to account for that. So if the committee was interested in it, or this committee is interested, or any member of the Assembly is interested, we can provide that. But it isn't part of our normal day-to-day reporting to the committee that we break down our budget into such small units, but it is doable if anybody is interested.
I think it'd be useful.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rogers. Moving on, Mr. Clark.
Thanks, Chair. Back to your response, Mr. Baker, on the 11th, and in terms of the costs.
Yeah.
I'm still struggling in terms of car park.
Okay. Sorry, I'm
still struggling in terms of this car park. So we go out to our initial expressions of interest in terms of the tender process, and this is where these bids, in terms of the total at 55.37 million for ICL, 56.21 and 56.18 in terms of the shadow bid. So that's where our starting point is, and that's where you base your business case. Then, so we're going for a position where we want 12 car parking spaces, and we now have a 40-year contract for additional car park spaces that come in sometime after that. That's right?
Well, yeah, okay. Continue.
Is that right? I just want to make sure I'm right. I wouldn't want to say something wrong here.
Okay. We don't have a contract in the sense that we are not paying for any car parking spaces.
Have we a lease?
Yes. The Belfast Metropolitan College has let a sublease to Ivywood Car Parks Limited to operate a car park, a sub-basement car park. That's correct, for 40 years.
So how many car parking spaces does the college have access to in that car park?
It doesn't have any. There's none of those.
Just trying to clear up this.
Yeah, no, they're not earmarked for the college.
Right. So there's no arrangement. There's no availability in terms of use for that for anyone from the college, and there's no charge for anything. And there's no.
Sorry, there's 12 surface car park.
So there's no charge.
In terms of the car parking.
It's a pay car park.
All right, that's fine.
Pay per use. So anybody can go into that car park and use it, but they have to pay. There's a barrier.
And in terms of the college itself, how long is the contract for it and the lease for the college itself?
The lease is for 250 years.
Okay.
The PPP contract is for 25 years.
Okay. What's the tie-in with the car park then?
Sorry?
40 years.
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, sorry, I don't think that's the question. The car park, the sublease to Ivywood College's Car Park Limited is for 40 years.
And there's no tie-in to the Met in relation to the car park whatsoever?
Well, the arrangement between Ivywood and the Met is that the Belfast Met permits Ivywood to operate a car park. Okay, it offered it a sublease.
Can we hear some sums there?
Yeah, well, the college doesn't pay any money for that. Obviously, Ivywood pays £10,000 per annum, index linked at 5% to Belfast Met.
Okay.
£10,000 per year. There is a profit share arrangement between Belfast Met and Ivywood. There's open book accounting here, so Ivywood makes its annual accounts available to Belfast Met, and if Ivywood makes a profit, and there's a point at which that profit share is triggered above a certain amount after tax, then Belfast Met gets a share in the profits. Now, I have to say, Ivywood is not at the point of making a profit on this car park, because obviously they had to borrow to build a car park, and then at the end of 40 years, the car park reverts to the ownership of Belfast Met. At no cost.
So that's a golden egg, is that what can we call it a golden egg then?
I don't know whether that's a technical term, Mr. Clark, but I mean that's the arrangement. It reverts
okay.
to the ownership of Belfast Met.
So you're going to have this after 40 years?
Yeah.
And many years are running now?
3 years.
And it's making no profit?
Well, it's not made a profit to date because they had to borrow.
And so at what stage, I mean, maybe more for Elaine, at what stage do you see that being profitable? Because why I'm asking this, I mean, and this may be slightly off in terms of this report is, but we have now got something where you're tied in terms of ownership after 40 years.
After 40 years.
And there'll be a cost, and there'll be a cost in terms of maintenance. I see you nodding your head, Pat, sorry.
So it's not our car park.
After 40 years?
It's not our car park now. It belongs to Ivywood Car Parks Limited, a totally independent company.
And after 40 years, what happens?
After 40 years.
Sorry, what happens after 40 years, Pat?
After 40 years, it comes into the ownership of BMC.
Yes, and that's the point I'm trying to make.
Apologies.
Okay. So after 40 years, it comes into your ownership. So what has been factored in, whether that actually will operate at a profit or a loss?
In 37 years' time?
Yes.
I have to admit I haven't looked at our accounts or forecasts in 37 years' time.
Right, and I'm sure you haven't. But the reason I'm asking here, and I mean I'm not an accountant,
yeah.
Liam, okay, I'm just a used car salesman. But I'm thinking after 40 years' time that a car park, well, I'm sure will need additional money spent on it, and at 3 years at the minute, and I can appreciate it's not making any money, but we've got about £500,000 of difference between the preferred bidder and the actual bidder. But we actually haven't factored in terms of taking on a liability. Because it is a liability if it's not going to make money.
No, what I said, it hasn't started to make a profit yet.
No, nor do you know if it'll ever make profit, Mr. Baker.
Well, actually, the profit and loss, the reason that it's making a loss is that Ivywood had to borrow money from its banker to build the car park, so it has not repaid that money. And Ivywood calculated.
I'll take Elaine on this one, Mr. Baker, being come the accountancy background. But as Elaine has said, that she hasn't looked at it in terms of its profitability or otherwise.
But sorry, if I can just step in. The net present value that we've looked at, and we're talking about the 500,000 which you've referred to, that was over a 25-year period.
Mm-hmm.
The car park is still outside our ownership. We've got our lease and we've got our £10,000 index-linked income coming through on that. But at the expiration of the PPP deal, there is still a period of 15 years to run on the car park.
It is.
And at the end of the PPP lease, the building reverts back to us.
Yeah, and there's nothing to say what it makes
terms of
profit
that.
or what it costs you money.
So in terms of the link between the car park profitability in 37 years' time and the PPP period, there's still a 15-year gap between those. And I don't think you'd pull any potential profitability outside the MPV period into account.
Okay. I'm just wondering, so, Mr. Redman, In terms of the table that you provided, Mr. Baker, in terms of these costs, and I mean, I think you have answered the question about the difficulty in terms of giving us it the way actually we required it or preferred it in terms of the construction costs.
Yeah, we didn't have that information.
You wouldn't,
in
yeah,
that
yeah.
form.
I take that on board. How was that calculated for the shadow bed?
How would the construction and life cycle and facilities
Yes.
well, what the college does is the college engages their legal, financial and technical experts, advisors. Those people draw together the costs that they would expect to see in a PPP project, and they put it together in a shadow bid model, and that then is submitted to the department, and the department submit that to Central Procurement Directorate for Central Procurement Directorate scrutiny and sign off.
You see, the bit I'm struggling here, Mr. Baker, is so there's that many different names around this car park, college, or whoever it is, but they entered in a process in terms of making a bid. The car park came late in the day. How are you satisfied that ICL did not include any element of the costs to the Belfast Met in terms of the building of the car park? Or maybe I should have framed it different. Do you not feel it strange where someone in terms of preferred bidder comes forward with a proposal to do something and then comes in with something that is obviously going to be a huge cost in terms of increase and a long time before they're actually going to get that money back? Why would they have changed that?
Well, first of all, there was a planning requirement on the bidder, not on the department or not on the college. When
were you first aware of the planning?
Sorry?
When was the department first aware there was a planning condition?
Well, the department was always aware of the planning condition, but the risk of planning is transferred to the bidder under a PPP. So, you know, to some extent, that's over to you, O bidder. You have to conform to any planning requirements, and how you do it is up to you, and how you pay for it is up to you. And the bid proposal that came in, as we discussed last time, it was for a surface car park for several hundred spaces, and then in addition to that, they were going to try and get a reduction on the price of some of the car parking spaces in front of the Odyssey building. The college and the department were entirely satisfied with that, but in a sense it was immaterial. We were never going to assess the bid on car parking. Now, ICL changed its mind, and we can speculate on why it changed its mind. I think one of the reasons was it did not want to build a surface car park because it felt it might have difficulty getting a change of use sometime down the line, and that would have been a particularly valuable use of a building, of a piece of land of that nature. It probably felt it could have done better. But the department's measure of control in all of this was that the bid that was submitted by ICL to provide the spec that we wanted, not just for the building but for the services over 25 years, was the most competitively advantageous bid. It beat the other bid, it beat the shadow bid model. Now, it's like saying, there's little green men on Mars, and until you can disprove there are, there will be little green men on Mars. Did they inflate the bid to include the cost of a sub-basement car park in that? Well, if they did, and they still managed to come in below the price of the other bidder and the shadow bid model, it was actually quite some trick to do so, And the fact that we are required to select the most advantageous bid, based both on cost and on quality, I think provides the control for us, because that is what we did.
But would it have been some trick? Because if the car park hadn't been there, surely the cost would have been somewhat less.
Well,
and then it would have been some trick for AMC.
It would have been. It may well have been. I mean, by the same token, we can speculate. What did the other bidder put in? Did they put in a helipad?
The wee men in Mars could be orange and not green. Yeah, we can speculate.
Yeah, I know. And I mean, so be it. But the bids were examined in considerable detail by the financial advisors and the legal advisors, and they trawled through them. Now, I don't think anybody found anything untoward by way of the bids being inflated to cover the cost of a car park and so forth.
Can I add one thing, Mr. Clark?
Mm-hmm.
When we finished our evaluation process of the two bids, we notified one individual or one company that they had won the bid, and we notified the other company that they had lost the bid, and we gave them a full breakdown of how and where they had lost the bid. And given that current estimates are that they would have probably lost the guts of £1 million in progressing their bid to the losing point. I think they probably would have, if they'd thought there was anything dodgy about how we had carried out our evaluation, I have no doubt whatsoever that they would have challenged that. So, to some extent, we have, and the committee can be assured, that the losing bidder looked at how the losing bidder actually lost their money in bringing forward this bid and didn't make a challenge that to some extent has to provide some assurance that they thought they lost the battle fair and square.
Just for the record, Mr. Redmond, you used the word dodgy, not me.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to imply that you had suggested
No, but
dodgy.
you quite freely used the word that it may have looked dodgy, but I didn't.
That's fair enough.
Okay.
I acknowledge that entirely.
Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Clark. Mr. Easton.
Thank you, Chair. Hi.
Good afternoon.
Okay.
Good evening.
My questions are the preferred bidders letter, which was the copy that you sent to the committee on the 11th of July. I don't know which one of you stand up. Oh, somebody stand up here.
Charles.
Yeah, I think it was myself who sent that one.
Yeah, and it highlights a significant number of unresolved issues. Given their significance, was it not premature to issue that letter conveying it as it did? That the college's intentions to appoint the ICL as the preferred bidder?
It was only an intention at that stage, and those were a number of things that were set out that were still to be negotiated. No matter in PPP procurement of a negotiated procedure, using the negotiated procedure, in all likelihood, whatever bid is considered to be appointed as the preferred bidder would have a number of clarifications or issues that would be highlighted that we would wish to perhaps pursue a little bit further before conferring absolutely and definitively preferred bidder status.
Okay, so what were those unresolved issues?
Well, one of the things was we wanted a parental company guarantee. We wanted to be sure that the entity that we were engaging with at that stage would have the wherewithal to go and deliver this project. So you're looking at, in these cases, and you're looking at a special purpose vehicle which may indeed not have significant worth to actually go and deliver the project, and we are effectively, we like contracting with special purpose vehicles because that means that no other activities of the company can impinge and negatively impact on the delivery of the project that we wish to deliver. But we still don't want to get in and go down the road with a company that would not be able to, would not have the wherewithal to actually deliver the campus. And we look for, in some cases, a parental company guarantee.
Okay, so we're talking about issues. How many unresolved issues were there?
Well, the preferred bidder letter that I have sent to you listed 12, but those may not have been the conclusive list because other things may come on the agenda. For example, the bank at a later stage then decided that they wish to vary their terms.
Do you not find it a bit strange, somebody becoming a preferred bidder, yet there's so many issues?
Well, all I can say, Mr. Easton, in response to that is that that letter was dated July. They weren't becoming a preferred bidder at that stage.
Right, okay. Do you accept, particularly given the ICL's privileged development position, that by not resolving the issues ahead of their appointment as preferred bidder, you put ICL in a position where they could dictate the pace and outcome of the negotiations?
Well, the principle in all of these tendering processes is to ensure that you don't put particularly the losing bidders to a huge amount of expense, because obviously they have no recourse to recoup that expense. So it's always a judgment call between how many things you can clarify before putting someone down as a preferred bidder and keeping everyone on board and keeping everyone expending money and then moving to the preferred bidder stage, where obviously you then have a great deal more chance of getting all of the interested parties to the table with, and most of these guys, including the banks and Belfast Harbour Commission and all of these folk, will be bringing expensive advisors, and you get better engagement, you get meaningful engagement when there is a prospect of a potential return. Anything up until that, it's hard to know what the level of commitment is. So it swings and roundabouts to some extent, Mr. Easton.
Can you remind me, how many bidders were there for this?
Two.
Two. So there were 12 issues with the one that you accepted that we know of.
Mm-hmm.
The other bidder, did they have the same 12 issues, or did they have more issues?
Well, they would have had issues. They would have had issues, but they weren't quantified and analysed in the same way as ICL's was, because we looked at ICL's in more detail after the evaluation process had been concluded.
Okay. With reference to the tipping points that Mr. Baker referred to in his previous evidence session, could you provide me more information on what particular points the department and the college considered one of the many options available to it? That is, opting out, going back to the reserve bidder, or going out to market again. Why did you not consider any of these options, or did you?
Well, I think, I know you've addressed the question to Mr. Baker, but I think it was myself that used the term tipping point, so I'm happy to elaborate on that, if you're happy enough, Derek.
Yeah, will you go ahead?
Well, when one of the tipping points was when they came looking for an increase in the value of the land from 3 million to 7.7, and if they had stuck with their guns on that one, that would have been a tipping point. The other tipping point that I can talk to is when they came to us looking to fund the car park. And again, I would reiterate, it was pain for ICL to have to fund this car park. They didn't fund the car park willingly. It was a tipping point for this project if they had said, we're not funding the car park. So those, if you like, were the tipping points. And unless they compromised, and in the case of the car park fully, or in the case of the land, compromise, those are the tipping points which, if ICL had stuck their ground, it was bye-bye, we were away.
Are there any other tipping points?
If I can just add, there was another critical point in the project later on when the bidder's banker was threatening to walk away from the project altogether or not to lend, and that was entirely to do with the credit crunch. And as you know, the banks were facing serious liquidity problems, were not lending money, and their appetite for this project was waning fast. And the college, sorry, not the college, ICL, with some help from the department, tried to identify alternative financial backers and could not do so. So at that point, the department had to take a decision whether to save the project or whether to walk away.
So we've identified 3 tipping points.
Sorry, if I may. I think I think this is more of an overarching point. At every point through the project, from the paper trail I've been able to work my way through, there were assessments being made of affordability and value for money against the requirements of the business case, which is effectively the main decision-making document and a summary of that. At no point throughout the project did they show that the business case requirements were not being met, i.e. this preferred bidder with all of the nuances going through it, was not showing that the measures set out in the business case, both monetary and non-monetary, were not able to be achieved.
Okay. Right. Well, you got your achievements and stuff, but is there any more tipping points I need to know about? Because I'll not stop until you.
I know, that's okay. I've run out of tipping points, Mr. Easton.
You've run out
I've
of
forgotten
tipping
I'd
points?
used that term, but there were, there were critical points during the course of this project where we had to take decisions, and I think we've identified three big
The
ones.
three main ones? Okay. Hey, yeah. Before that, do you want me to do the other thing?
Yeah,
Well, I'll let you.
Just on response, Tom, you talked about, and this is the difficulty with having two evidence sessions so far apart.
I know.
Because it's actually difficult to try and recall myself what was said the last time. But you talked in response there, Tom, to Alex, about they came. What did you say about the 3 million and the 7.7? What was that in relation to?
The increase in the land price.
The site where we built the college.
The site, sorry.
So, and what did you finish up settling that?
5.
So why then, Mr. Baker, would that not be a tipping point? Why did that not tip it? Because I mean, in terms of if we get back to the bidding process,
yeah,
I mean that's altered now.
It does
by a few million.
Okay. Sorry, Mr. Redmond mentioned something to me. Originally, the site on which to build the college was to be included in the PFI deal, and so it would have been costed to the college through the unitary charge. The original price was £3 million in the bid.
That was in the bid?
It was in the bid.
Okay.
During the process, the owners of the land, Belfast Harbour Commissioners and Titanic Quarter Limited, wanted to increase the cost of the land because land prices were rising to 7.7 million.
Yeah.
So that caused us a real difficulty.
But why did it cause you a difficulty?
Caused us a difficulty because we, or the college, would have had to pay for that increased site price through the unitary charge.
But surely, well, maybe I'm wrong here and naive. So someone works up the bid, and in terms of their bid, they put a figure in terms of 3 million for the land, which brings them out at 55.37 million.
Yeah.
Sorry,
sorry, let me finish my trail of thought here, Tom. Sorry, and then sorry, let me just get this.
Okay.
So we're at 55.37 in terms of this bid. But then whenever we start to draw this up, whenever they go to try and acquire that piece of land, it goes from 3 million to 7.7. So the 3 million has been built into 55.37, changing it to 5. No?
No. Sorry, as I explained earlier, the letter that I gave you, which set out those costs, was only a small part, or certainly wasn't the complete financial evaluation. I gave the comparable information to the information that was requested. I tried to provide.
I haven't got it in front of me. Let me drill this again. Sorry.
But
so in response, Mr. Baker said in response, Tom, that was included in the bid. So the land acquisition was down to the person who made the bid, £3 million.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Up to the time we get to the stage where we're drawing this up and getting approval, the person who actually owns the land, who's not the bidder, wants it 7.7.
Right.
So they come scratching their head to the public person saying, we actually want to move this from 3 million, include it in the bid, to 7.7.
Yeah.
And rightly so, you sent them packing.
Yeah. Well,
but you settled at 5 million.
Agreed 5 million.
So you give them £2 million more than what you initially valued at the contract at.
Yeah, and we
so where am I not getting
we re-evaluated. First of all, the 3 or the 5 or the 7.7 is not included in the information that I provided to the committee. I provided the information I provided was around construction costs because that's what I was asked for. So the 3 or the 5 is not included in that information.
All right, so.
But the 3 was included in the overall evaluation of all of the financial inputs.
Yeah, the 3 was.
The 3 was. And when we came to the point that we agreed the 5, we reran the evaluation process to ensure to ourselves that ICL remained the most competitive bid.
Yeah. And that's very useful for us to see that.
Yeah. Which we did.
Yeah.
That was the point I didn't get to, Mr. Clark.
Sorry. Okay, thank you, Alex. Yeah.
Oh, back to me. I'm directing this to the college, not the department. Did you ever consider walking away, and did you ever seek advice from the department about that?
Personally, no.
Okay.
Well, since I've come in, no, we've never had a point where we've said to the department, you know, this is it, we're throwing the towel in.
Were you there? Did anyone?
Before I was there, well, there is evidence at times of the governing body, and I think the department was aware of that, sending letters both to ICL, threatening letters, saying, you know, things were taking too long, things were being delayed, and whatever. So I do think that there were points where the governing body certainly made their dissatisfaction with what was happening known. But I certainly haven't seen any evidence, Mr. Easton, that at any stage, you know, I would have described it as a tipping point. The tenor of the letters is more complaining and dissatisfaction. They're not threatening in that sense. And I have no evidence of them doing the same with the department.
If I can just add, the contract was actually signed, I think, before you came on board, Marie-Therese.
Oh yes, it was signed in April of 2009.
But I had various meetings with the governing body at various times when there were discussions and
about walking away.
Well, I suppose walking away would have been on the agenda, but it was wider than that. It was, you know, it was trying to find the most economical way of addressing the problems that existed at College Square East and Brunswick Street. Yeah. And while ICL proposal did have its difficulties, while it remained it remained a potential solution, we continued to work with it. But yes, walking away.
It was discussed.
Would have been on the agenda.
So there were letters to ICL suggesting that you may walk away that you've seen sight of before your time.
I wouldn't go as far as to say certainly the walking away bit. There were certainly letters of dissatisfaction at the pace at which things were happening and asking questions of ICL. That's the ones I'm party to.
Would there have been anything worded not suggesting walking away, but that you may have to review the situation, anything of that nature? Review the relationship between them and the project? Or?
This you've caught me off guard because
that's good.
Well, simply because I don't have the evidence in front of me. So it's a long time since I read those letters.
Would we be allowed to see those letters?
I'm not sure if letters of that nature exist, but what I do know, it was made abundantly clear to ICL on a number of occasions. For example, if they didn't pay for the car park, they would have no project. That was made abundantly clear to them.
Yeah, well, we're not talking about the department. There are letters from the college.
Well, certainly the governing body minutes, and I've seen at least one letter, which was, it was businesslike. But they weren't threatening that they were going to walk away from the project. They were just concerned about how long it was taking.
Can we see that letter?
Well, I will try and find it. As I say, it's a while since I saw it, Mr. Easton, but I will endeavour to find a copy of that letter for you.
Okay. Right, we're going back to the department here. Did the department ever advise against or discourage the college from walking away from the project? And now, bearing in mind, you've already suggested that there were discussions about walking away.
There were discussions with the governing body, and there would have been a discussion about the implications of walking away at particular times. There were times when it would have been easy to walk away. There were other times when perhaps there would have been implications of walking away, and there is absolutely no doubt. Yes, all of that was discussed.
So was any of this documented, these discussions?
Some of it was documented, yes.
There's minutes?
There will be a minute. I can remember one particular minute where some of the implications of walking away, when, for example, you had agreed a deal that was value for money. So when we had agreed to pay the $5 million for the site, and I'm talking, when I say we, we're talking college and department, when we agreed that, and we had brought a deal, or we had concluded and negotiated a deal that was value for money, there would be implications. You know, if you walked away at that stage without some clear reason for doing so, the bidder would wish to know why that was. The bidder would, under FOI, look for, was it value for money, and if there was a value for money deal on the table from that bidder, I'm sure that bidder would have looked to redress the expenditure that bidder had incurred in a very, very expensive bidding process.
Can we have sight of those?
Yes,
we
Thank
you.
Can find out.
Just on that, Tom, I'm just picking up, and I think you seem as if you're more reluctant than anyone else in terms of actually ending that. Did you ever advise in ending the contract? Did you ever advise then the college not to end it?
No, it was not for me to advise the college. It was for the college at all times to progress their business case and submit their business case to the department for approval.
So at no time did you ever discourage them?
At no time. Well, it depends what you mean by discourage.
By suggesting,
for example,
I'll explain. If you want me to explain what I mean, I can do that.
No, well, okay, but if, for example, you mean not, if for example you mean
maybe I should explain. I think you're difficultly understanding the question there. I think he's difficultly understanding what I'm asking him, so I'll ask him in a different way, Chair.
Sorry,
at any stage,
words in my head.
At any stage, did the college suggest in stronger terms about ending the contract? At which stage you may have tried to discourage them?
If by that you mean explaining the implications of walking away, yes, I explained the implications of walking away.
Would you have tried to discourage them?
It was not discouragement.
Right. Thank you. That's clear.
But I want to make it absolutely clear.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Question.
You finished your line of questions?
There's one left, if you want.
No, I think it's kind of been covered, that one.
Right,
yeah. Okay. Just, Mr. Baker, just for clarity, we talked about tipping points, and at the time, the lost appetite in terms of the car park at that tipping point. The department stepped in. What action, just for clarification, what action was taken by the department and yourselves at that time?
I just kind of clarify, when I talked about loss of appetite, I was referring to the Ulster Bank and the lending to the bidder. It wasn't to do with the car park. This was towards the end of 2008. Is that what you're asking?
Yes, Claire? I just wanted clarification on that.
In late 2008, the bank came along and said, look, we're losing our appetite here, we're not going to lend. And that threatened the whole project. We had to take a decision, the college and the department. What do we do here? Do we let the project collapse, or do we see what we can do to save the project, but always in a way that preserves the value for money? And a wee bit of shade and light here, and I mean, I think I mentioned this at the last hearing, and this is relevant. Bear in mind, my department had been in receipt of pretty stinging criticism from this committee about throwing in the towel on the Springvale Educational Village project. Effectively, the committee, and I'll use the vernacular here, I paraphrase, but the committee said when the going got tough, the department walked away. And the recommendation specifically to the department was very, very clearly, when the department is faced with serious difficulties, serious operational difficulties in an important project, this committee, PAC, expects the department to take every means possible, or every reasonable means, to deliver the project objectives, and not doing so is not acceptable. And that's what this committee said to the department. So the department had a choice. What do we do? Do we walk away because of the impact of the credit crunch, or how can we save this? The department had available to it capital of £5 million. It was in its budget. The department usually has a capital budget of in and around £35 to £40 million every year, which is used pretty exclusively for investment in further education or higher education. And it decided that to reduce the borrowing requirement of the bidder, the department would put up a capital of £5 million. Now, that is the effect of reducing the unitary charge. It's a bit like a mortgage. You know, you either pay a big deposit and a lower mortgage repayment, or a smaller deposit and a higher mortgage repayment. So the department decided to offer a £5 million increased bullet payment, bringing its bullet payment from £10 million to £15 million in total. However, in doing so, the department bore in mind the objective which I described earlier, to deliver the project, which this would do, but also to do it in a way which preserved affordability and value for money. And it reran the value for money assessment, and the value for money assessment came out positive as a consequence of that refinancing deal. So it achieved all the objectives. It preserved affordability, value for money, and it saved the project.
Thank you. Deputy Chairperson, you were looking...
Chairperson, Mr Baker has mentioned Springvale, and we're not turning this into a history lesson, but that was immediately after the peace process. Can you imagine the shattered lives were left behind when you did walk away from that project? But the committee, being critical of you at that stage, didn't tell you in the future, you don't throw in the towel if something's wrong. But why throw in the towel if the procedures are correct? Now, we are, I think, summing up. There were significant weaknesses in the project management. Would you agree?
There were significant weaknesses in the college's governance arrangements. I agree entirely.
I get
and
the
in elements
impression,
of the project management, I
Mr
agree.
Baker, are you taking any responsibility for this project?
Yes, I mean, I've just said I've agreed with you.
Well,
There's
I certainly
significant
will want to
weaknesses in the
read
governance and the project
Hansard
management.
report later, because you made some remarks at the beginning which worry me, because the only purpose of this committee is to inquire into projects so that in the future we won't have repetition. That's the only reason. Nobody's looking for a head on a platter or anything like that. But if people come along and say, oh no, do you agree that there were significant delays in the project after the preferred bidder was selected?
Yes.
Do you now accept that in the future that wouldn't happen again, that you would be aware of the weakness?
I would accept that it should not happen again. I agree with you. I mean, you said, do I agree that it would not happen again? I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but I agree with you that it should not happen again.
I'll tell you why, Mr Baker, this is interesting. I keep telling my colleagues here I'm the longest member in this committee.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
I keep telling my colleagues here I'm the longest serving member of this committee, 14 years, and it appalls me that time and time again we've sat on inquiries, the same mistakes were made again. So I hope you're not preparing me for some event in the future when I might not be here, that the same significant weaknesses arise. That's all I'm asking. Now, the college itself, I'm just wondering, and I'm trying to put myself in the position, and I'm sure Marie-Therese will put me right in it. What additional bill have you picked up as a result of these obvious weaknesses that were not identified? How many £1 million extra has it cost?
You know, I think that that's just a very difficult question, because if we weren't where we are, if we weren't in the PFI, the question then I have to ask and come back to is, well, where might we be? So if the PFI had been off the table, I don't think at that time that government, and we go back to government policy, and PFI was the fashion. Everything was being done.
I agree with
we
you.
know all the hospitals that were built that way, and whatever in the schools. So that was the flavour of the day. So there didn't at that point appear to be any alternative than a PFI track. And if we hadn't gone down that, well then, we may well, very, very well be sitting still in College Square East and Brunswick Street in environments that were really not fit for purpose any longer. And I'm not sure that there would have been alternative resourcing for us to rehab and refurbish those buildings, certainly to the quality that we now have in Titanic Quarter and subsequently actually in E3. So I think that's a hard question to answer. What would our costs be if we were still in, the old buildings?
No, I'm sorry, Marie-Therese, that wasn't what I was asking. If these weaknesses in the project management and the delays after the preferred bidder was identified, if those all had been addressed, I'm assuming, rightly or wrongly, that you might not be committed to the additional money that you now obviously picked up the bill for, and I was asking how much was it?
Well, I mean, again,
I think it's 20 million, but I may be wrong.
My understanding of the unitary charge is that we committed to the unitary charge and we're still paying the same unitary charge, and the question then was, could we afford it? We can now afford it. We are making, we have brought the college to a financial position that allows us to afford it, to enjoy the benefits that it has absolutely brought, in my view, to student success and achievement, and to the reputation of further education. And certainly it has built our relationship with the private sector to a much greater and stronger extent than we ever had achieved previously. So, that's, for me, sitting looking at it every day, that's where I am. College is where it is. We are slowly getting better. We've gone from inadequate to good in 4 years. And we hope over the next period to go from good to great.
I think, Chairperson, there's nobody around this table would disagree with a single syllable of that. And I'm glad I made it clear in my opening remarks that I'm totally prejudiced in favour of the college. And just finally, and it's back to Pat. Obviously, Pat, you made it very clear at the beginning that you had no preferred interest in the college going to Titanic Quarter. You robustly answered that. And I asked the simple question then, what was your role in the Strategic Investment Board in this whole project, for which now you're sharing a third of the blame?
Well, first of all, I don't say there's a blame attached to this project. All projects, no matter which ones, are difficult projects, and as Derek said, you have to address those. If I can take you down through the chronology of a few things. We started off with 2 projects, which was a PPP project and an ICT project. As a result of planning, we then took out purchase of the site, so that became a purchase project. Okay. And as a result of the guidance in removing assets that weren't integral, then that became a separate project, i.e. Brunswick Street and College Square East. Yeah. Now, if you assess each of these projects on their own merits, the PPP project had a predicted margin of 3.2%, which is 1.6 million value added over the life of the project. Better than the shadow bid model, which was set many years before. On the disposal project, College Square East and Brunswick Street, and College Square East became surplus in 2013, so it was no longer used after that. They were valued by LPS in 2013. At the time, they were surplus at 4 million, and they've just been sold for 5.5 million, and that's 1.5 million better than that benchmark. In relation to the land purchase in TQ, as Derek mentioned, TQ, as a result of BHC applying, a public body applying the guidance to get the best value for their asset, they asked for an uplift. They wanted an additional 4.7 million. We negotiated them down to additional 2, and one of that, as I said, went back to the public purse. And LPS have signed that off. And on the ICT project, that was predicted to cost 6.2 million, and it came in at 4.9. And that's a 1.3 million better than the benchmark. So on each of these projects, the individual projects, which make up the entirety of the college, they have delivered value for the public purse.
Sorry, Pat. I mean, and you're that well rehearsed for today, but you actually, the fact is, you omit it to say. So you're talking about what we got today because you didn't sell it until recently. But in terms of whenever you took out Brunswick Street and College Square, how much was the estimate in terms of the value? No, just answer the question.
But that's like you asking me, what's my house price
Well, that's
worth
what you...
2
Well,
years ago,
why
or
then did you...
5 years ago?
Why was it taken out?
Well, would I dispose...
Because someone in the department actually thought they could have realised more money for it, because at the particular time that decision was made, property values were going up.
To go back to the
No, just answer the point.
Yes.
How much was it taken out at?
Why would it take
How much was it taken out at?
It was taken out on
At what
valuation
value?
at 10 million.
At 10 million, and you got 5. And you saying that's a success story?
No, what I'm
I say
saying
it's
to
a
you
farce.
is that the guidance that issued from this same committee in 2007 had projects that weren't integral buildings that weren't integral to a project need to be removed from it, and they were removed from it.
And you realised £5 million less.
No.
So don't come here today, Pat, so as you're trying to get a sound bite, trying to make SIB look some wonderful department. Your fingerprints are all over this, like the departments as well. There has been mistakes made, and I think it's time you stood up and realised that mistakes have been made and accept the responsibility for that. But I mean, it's obvious you've come in here with a script to try and present some sort of case that this has been a wonderful story. Indeed, it's not a wonderful story. Whoever made the decision to remove these and not do something at that particular time when they were at higher value, but you don't want to focus on that. We could also say, sure, if we actually waited another 3 years and built the college in a depressed market, would have got it for less. But that wasn't the case either. But if you're in here to try and put yourself on a pedestal with some sort of facts to try and manage figures to make it look like a wonderful deal, you haven't convinced me, and I don't think you'll convince the wider public in terms of the handling of it.
Mr. Clark, my job is not to
well, it's coming across, that's what you're trying to do.
It's not. They're the figures that are there.
Sorry, just to conclude, members, we've all had the opportunity to ask our questions, and just to conclude on this session today, I want to just maybe bring in Mr. Brennan or Mr. Donnelly if they have anything that they may well want to add. No? No? Okay, thank you. Members, if there's no other questions for clarification, okay, members. And just in terms of this session today, we had our session on the 18th of June. I found this evidence session today very valuable in terms of moving forward with our report. There was a lot of talk about marriage earlier on in the session, and I believe Habibi came out of that marriage with a lot of teething problems, but in my opinion, thankfully the foster mothers stepped in and sorted out the teething problem and produced teeth, which is now the wonderful Met. And that goes without saying. I'm sure all members of this committee would want to congratulate the wonderful building that it is. Absolutely. And the staff and everybody that's working within it, and that includes the students and the staff. Members, can I thank you for your attendance before the committee today? There has been some useful information provided today. We will be taking all this on board as we develop our report, and there is some outstanding pieces of information that we've requested. The clerk will write in due course to yourselves for that information. It just remains for me to say thank you to yourselves, to the Auditor General and to the Mr. Mike Brennan and your team for attending here today, and thank you to Hansard. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members.
Thank you.
Members, for the remaining item of business, which is only one or two pieces of information, it's necessary that we move into closed session. So are members content that we move into closed?